Hello and welcome to Circle Passages and Higher Ground. Heather and I will hopefully, I don't know, we'll share
We'll do
today.
something.
Yes, we will. Yes, and thank you for tuning in. We're at TC Media TV and studios here in Olympia, so it's just always such a treasure and a pleasure to be here, isn't it? So wonderful that this is here in our community, and it gives us a chance to share with others lots of different things.
Kinship worldviews.
Well, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So defining that, what would you say? How would you?
Yeah, so kinship is relations, and so a worldview, seeing the world as one of relatedness, one in which we're all connected, and one in which on some level we're all kindred, we're kin, we're family. And so I think you have it in people like Black Elk or, indigenous perspectives, but also in people like St. Francis, Brother Bear and Sister Moon, and extending life and equality and honor and respect in kinship with the world.
Wonderful, 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 for sure. And would you say that taking that or narrowing that scope in a sense, not so much narrowing it, but more like the U.S. with indigenous and, or was that the other book as far as the settlers and the indigenous and that kinship?
So I liked both books, but I just listened recently, as in today, to The Becoming Kin, and she brought in the tribe of Judaism. And so I think it is important that we all come from a tribal consciousness, and in which there was an animated view, enchanted or living and souled, however you want to see that or say that, of the world around us. And so it's at the roots of a Western model, even though it's not currently a Western model, we have a connection to it. We've just disconnected ourselves. And so I like to believe, in a way so we can return more easily, that it's an indigenous model, but it's also one that the West knows we've just forgotten and we can remember.
So I think, more discussion about this, hopefully bringing that to the attention of all of us, right? The public, and just hopefully appreciating, recognizing just what you're talking about. And it's kind of a return is what it also sounds like, a return to relationships that have developed over time. And certainly it seemed like here with Becoming Kin, where she's talking about kind of the beginnings of this country right here, the U.S., and the settlers coming in, and then of course moving across the country, and the interactions anyway.
Yeah, that we are obviously immigrants. We're settlers, which she acknowledges is not a perspective that we want to necessarily take on. But again, I do really want to return to that sense that all of us come from a place of rooted connection. People who came here, like to Australia, who were, was a penal colony, and we were in a way settled by rebels, and religiously persecuted, kind of a motley crew. But we were disrupted from our roots, but that we can return to our roots, and so that's where I do like the bringing in of that we all have a tribal, indigenous past at some point. We may be cut off from it, but that we can return, because I think it's so essential to reconnect with the earth. And it makes me think too of biocentrism, because that's a life, biocentric, life-centered. And that's, I think, another way of saying kinship. And that's an ethic in which all nature has the same living respect and honor, equality. And it's also a new grand unified theory, a scientific theory. And so that, I think, is a return in science to what we knew ancestrally and instinctually. And so I like to believe it's newly emergent from the Western mind, that the seeds were there and were dormant and are coming back up.
And it certainly seems to be a need in our society, our culture of, again, the U.S. and how we perceive some of these things, because it seems like we've lost that idea of kinship. It's more like might makes right sort of thing, and I hate to put it that way, but it seems like that's what the settlers kind of did, and what we've kind of continued to promote, the majority, the dominant part of this society it's whatever, manifest destiny, which is just a horrible concept to me. But so you're saying maybe from the right side, the feminine side of our brain and our existence of kind of nurturing what that for relationship, how it kind of has developed, or how it began anyway.
Yeah, so Buck and I were talking about the hemispheres of the brain and the neuroanatomist Jill Bolte Taylor, who I brought up, and my stroke of insight. So she works with the right hemisphere as archetypally and traditionally feminine. And then she had a stroke, so her left hemisphere went offline. And this is a good way to exemplify this as natural but repressed, is that once her left hemisphere went offline, she could literally not distinguish. She was not separate from anything. She had that cosmic bliss. And then gradually her left hemisphere came back online, parts over 6 weeks, part 8 years, part never. And she never gave the dominant reins back to the left hemisphere, which she used the archetypes, the 4 archetypes of Carl Jung, of the ego and the shadow as the 2 left hemisphere archetypes that are traditionally masculine, and they're dominant right now. And dominant Western worldview would be there. And then the right hemisphere is the soul, anima animus, and the self, which is, connects to nature, connects to everything. So this is a separate model on the left, connected model on the right. So that is exactly what we're talking about. Sometimes they say feminine, and then in rites of passage work, they often say indigenous, oral traditions, all different things, feelings, empathy, connection. And so it is returning to that. And we all have access, but we don't have a culture that acculturates us into that. And then even honestly, we have not taken those window periods of neural development, which would also help foster this. So it's a return that we can all make, and I love that books like this are coming out, and certainly our world, the mother that we are one with, hence my rock. In a biocentric kinship model, we are in equality with all life. And that, for the Western mind, is like, a bit of a mind explode or implode.
Because it seems the attitude is, Earth is to be used, as opposed to, really living and try to live in harmony with it, and listen to Earth,
Right.
as opposed to, no, we're going to impose whatever it is, whatever we need, we're going to take from the Earth. Seems to be our attitude.
Yeah, and it's obviously not sustainable, that extraction. And then also, I guess tragically, I'm thinking of the recycling. We extract, and then garbage is what we're returning. So neither move is sustainable. And so we were talking before in the interim about the friend that went to the Sphinx, and her husband, an alchemist, took some sand or dirt, as did another man, and the Sphinx told one of the other members that 2 men, and named them, had taken sand and needed to return it. And that, again, is just not, like the fact that you have to ask permission, especially around things like oil, or, I mean, we're just so used to extracting resources that's a foreign concept. Like, we may get it around sacred earth, but we don't apply it to our general lives. And it really needs to be applied universally in a kinship model.
Well, we're seeing that, right? With, and I know we've done some shows with on climate change, and I mean, there's a great example of how we're disrupting because of whatever we might think it's our needs, but what we're actually doing, like you said, extracting from the earth itself and trying to manipulate whatever it is that we're pulling out to serve us, where it's doing just the opposite, isn't it? It's destroying.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things about the left hemisphere, which is, again, the masculine Western dominant, is that it's, V.S. Ramachandran identified that it's associated with conformity and denial, which are two things that are just not sustainable in terms of denying climate change and conforming in terms of behavior. And you know, I'm going to the Native Tribal Summit next week for ecology and sustainability, so I'm really excited to see and really kind of sit in witness of a different model of kinship and relatedness with the land, and how that can look and feel in terms of sustainability.
You know, what's mind-boggling about that too, to me, is what you just mentioned about the sustainability and the indigenous. They've been doing this for thousands of years. You know, this isn't new, is it? But again, it's the settlers coming in, taking over how our culture has evolved, but really just not really being mindful enough of the folks who are already here from the beginning, of how they approach Mother Earth. It's I don't know. And, you know, it kind of also reminds me of a perspective that we were talking about before, and I know we have on other shows, about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then the Blackfeet tribe, and actually other First Nations, of really looking at approaching, like Maslow, just real briefly, from basic needs to becoming self-actualized. Where the Blackfeet, you come into this life self-actualized. You know, you're already accepted in society as infants, youth, as opposed to, you know, you kind of earn your way to get there. But it's the concept, again, that is so refreshing. And again, going back to just treating and how we treat Mother Earth, is this has been going on for thousands of years. Why aren't we paying closer attention to, here's how the folks that were already here have been doing it, so.
Yeah, well, so one of the things that makes me think of, David Maybury Lewis, anthropologist, maybe archaeologist too, but he did a PBS series, and one of them was called A Poor Man Shames Us All, one of the shows. And so part of the basic needs is that in a kinship model, your basic needs are met. You can maintain self-actualization because in a kinship, which is like a family, community relationship, your needs are met. That's not true in our culture. And so whereas the Blackfeet go from self-actualization to community and culture, you know, it's built upon this relationship model where people give to each other, you know, whether it's potlatch or whatever it is, people are extending themselves in community. And we've outsourced that to insurance and different things. And we need to shift our perspective so we can rely on each other, not least of which because we're in a time of need where government isn't meeting our needs collectively. You know, I mean, they're increasing homeless youth. I don't know if it's like 40% of single-parent household children have food insecurity, but like we need to, for 1,000,001 reasons, including humans as well as the environment, need to restore kinship because we don't meet each other's needs. You know, So we can't even self-actualize, which is the bottom of the Blackfoot pyramid, because we are in a deficit model. Or we can if we change our deficit model.
And there it is. It's the perspective, right? So
Yeah.
this conference and the summit that you're going to be going to should be just fascinating with really talking about perspective. And it's one that has been tried and true. It's been here for thousands of years, and yet we collectively, our society keeps fighting that, it seems. And you just brought up a point, well, with the homeless, but even those who have a place to live where food is still not plentiful, there's just a lot of hunger that goes on, even though you might have a roof over your heads, which is sad. We're looking at the Blackfeet First Nation model of community, taking care of one another. So you shouldn't want for anything. That's what has been explained, and it just, wow.
And we do have, in the Scandinavian countries, the countries that are the happiest countries, have a socialized system. We're partially socialized, and I should have said unhoused, which is the correct and modern language. But currently on our planet, we have, 8 to 10 people have as much money as the bottom 50%. We have just this very skewed economic polarity where it isn't a tribe where your wealth is in community and in right relationship and kinship. It's a totally different model of wealth and belonging. And think of the mental health difference you would make. It takes a village. We don't have villages. Part of it is economic distribution, but part of it is love, is the welfare of all of the relations within the community. And quite frankly, we have a deficit model, but it's also a fear-based model because of that. And whereas the kinship is a love-based model of relationship, of connection. And those have really different foundations.
It'll be interesting next week too, of again, kind of how that relates, the kinship, because again, it's really sounds like more about community and working together, and how we can try to offset some of the destruction that's going on. So, and it's through that kinship, I think, of similar belief system, I guess, in some ways.
And a collaborative worldview, which is also part of the kind of the right feminine and also indigenous, earth-based, land-based perspectives, where instead of moving into that competitive, which is again fear-based, and it's separative versus relational, instead of that move, which is so Western, we're going to compete, and that. It's still striving for excellence, but instead you extend in cooperation. Like, what can we build together versus apart and against each other?
And again, it seems like here's our approach in this culture of, and not to get into the political aspect of capitalism, but it just doesn't kind of fit that model, it seems, of the community and sharing. It's more of kind of like, what can I get? Companies kind of saying that, to survive, I suppose. But it just seems to kind of oppose one another.
Yeah, and so that makes me think of two things. But one is corporate personhood, right? So in a lot of indigenous culture and then litigation brought on by indigenous groups, extending personhood to mountains, to the natural landscape, because if corporations are people, they're sociopathic. They don't have empathy. They're literally built to increase the bottom line of the investors, and then also to distinguish between we don't have a free market capitalist society. We give the greatest subsidies to the greatest polluters. So not everything is as it seems or as people say it is, and so we need to be more distinguishing and discriminating and call for reform, because we really can't afford to have corporations be empowered sociopathic organizations. Like, that is not a working model at this point.
Seems like that's going to be a real tough, how are we going to make that shift, right? And I know it's not going to be instantaneous, but even in a gradual way, but just the perspective, the attitude, that's quite a challenge, it seems.
Quite a challenge. People do have the power if we could reclaim it. I mean, lobbying and some of the things are very insidious. And at the same time, I think we can vote with our wallet, but also, really demand change, because it is not in our best interest to allow these corporations the power they have. And so active engagement, involved and educated citizenry would be great.
Is it really possible, though, to kind of put a chink in that power structure? I mean, you just described several different ways of doing that, but it seems like getting everybody together on the same page who do want to see reform, if you would, or some changes, and really embracing kinship and how can we work together, as opposed to here are the 1%ers and here's the rest of us, and you're going to dance to this tune right here, is what it seems.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that we need to not be disenfranchised, because that's a strategy, a socio-political economic strategy. The other part is that we don't need, critical mass isn't 50%, like it's like 14 to 30. I don't know exactly what it is mathematically, but it's a spectrum. So conscious communities, Margaret Mead's quote, I think, a small group, summarizing, can create effective change nothing else ever has. And so it doesn't take 50%. It doesn't take some crazy, unachievable amount of input. It's all of us working together, doing the things we can, will make a difference, and actually can make the critical difference. And right now it's really a matter of sustainability, which is a euphemism for life or death. And we're fighting for that 7 generations, which is really our children and our children's children and their children. And, we've got everything at stake. So yes, I believe we can affect change.
And that brings up a good point, too, of this article with Blackfeet and Maslow, but with Blackfeet and, again, First Nation ideas of really, again, it's community that's so important. We're going to take care of one another. And you would think in bolstering the kinship idea of this is going to be good for all of us. It's not like you're going to be wanting for something. It's going to be probably just the opposite. So
right. And one of the things that we haven't brought up yet is that now with genetics and modern DNA, like, we literally know that we come from one genetic Eve or ancestor. We are all kin. We are stardust. On a molecular subatomic level, we are, extending our matter in exchange with all life. So in all different new ways that our ancestors had philosophical or myths or other correlates, but they didn't have the scientific evidence, we are kin, and to include genetically. And so I'm hoping that all of those things can help, but that also we are better in society. Like, we're better in community. Our mental health is better. Everything's better. We've been called by every religious organization since the dawn of time, that golden rule, do unto others. And that's really a kinship model, but it's extending the in-group, this is family, this is kin, only my blood, to the reality that we are all interdependent in relationship and that we are all kin.
So how do we get back to our roots? It would seem to really, again, to further embrace of if we all came from a source and we're all kind of one, we certainly don't seem to, we don't, it's not those,
like it.
yeah, exactly, no, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, so a couple of things. One, I have a barefoot ethic in my work, and listening to the earth through the feet, and really like touching in, getting back to the earth. There's an electromagnetic reality to that, but there's also an honoring. Like when you cross a threshold, which is that initiation, the liminal aspect, you take your shoes off. You know, like whether it's going up Mount Shasta one time, I was asked kind of by the land to take my shoes off at a point. So there can be that, but also if we enter a shrine or different, like a sanctum, inner temple, we leave our shoes. So there's that kind of opening and receptivity to the land. But then also I'm going to bring in the painting that's not finished. But, you know, throughout time, every single culture has this relationship with animals, with the sun and the moon, with the earth in all different ways. And so that's part of our psyche. That's why I think it's important to acknowledge that we all have that in our psychological landscape. You know, it's buried. We need to excavate down to it a little bit. But if we open to psyche or soul in whatever way you know it, that is where the initiation comes. And that's where you can be called in kinship. Like I had an experience, it was actually on Mount Shasta with bear, and then I brought in our bear skulls again because they're so cool. But you know, who of this relatedness, all my relationships in the world, who do you relate to? You know, like maybe you'll have a synchronicity with a hummingbird. Maybe once you open, I think the initiation begins. And the denial and conformity of the left hemisphere make us want to be like, la, 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 I can't hear you, you know. But once you open, and it's in our best interest to open, we'll literally feel better. Once you open, I think you'll be met in the world by all kinds of information that'll help initiate you on your way, a relationship and a journey back into right relationship with the earth. That's where that goes.
And you've talked about this a number of times, is nature deficit. And it's just what you're talking about. It was really to step back into it, and plants and animals have been here a whole lot longer than we have, people have been, and yet, you know, it's kind of like, well, you serve us, as opposed to talk about kinship, is developing kinship with nature.
Yeah.
Is promoting more of that, and hopefully then appreciating, again, the environment. Well, it's not for me to control, it's hopefully to live together, just like you were saying too, with being barefooted, and kind of getting those vibes literally from the earth.
And going, you know, rites of passage, going into nature, again, if you want to look at Judaism and the tribes of Israel, but like all of us have a tribal culture we came from, where you were initiated in the wilds, the wilderness quest, the vision quest. And now there was that crazy statistic that I do need to find, but you know, where youth spend like 7 hours on their phone outside of school, which on a screen, usually it's a phone, but on technology somehow, and only like 7 or 14 intentional minutes outside. So minutes. Yeah. So it's a radical nature deficit disorder at this point with a technology addiction. And then quite honestly, the worse things get in relationship with the earth in terms of our extractive model and our lack of sustainability and our climate crisis, I get why especially youth want to just retreat into technology, into their avatar in whatever game that I don't know about. And at the same time, you know, that's all the more reason to do a wilderness quest or to do something, even if it's going outside for 10 minutes, but to start, to begin that journey back home, I'm going to call it home, to ourselves as embodied land, as realizing we're a part of, not apart from nature.
Before all the gadgets started showing up, I mean, it was just us and the earth, right?
Yeah.
So we figured out how to work together, and then obviously more and more stuff was being invented, and industrial revolution, all those kinds of things. I mean, it's just, wow, just we got sidetracked big time.
Yeah, we got sidetracked, and it's easy, like no blame. It's easy to see how we got where we are, and at the same time, to recognize the urgency of the call of return, to return. And I really do believe, whatever name you give it, intuition, gut feeling, instincts, I think it's an anatomical part of us, our psyche, our psychology. But there's part of us that knows in a different kind of way because it's collective. Mm-hmm. When you connect with soul, with psyche, whatever that is, it's connected in that kinship model. And then the beauty is then you can move in the world and you can know things you couldn't otherwise know as a separate self. We've all had those experiences of where you have a prescient moment and you know not to do something, or you have a vision or a glimpse of something and it saves your life. There are so many benefits to reattaching or rerouting into the earth in that kinship model, and we literally need to do it at this point to be sustainable as a habitable planet.
Learn to tune in to that right side, right hemispheres, like you're talking about, be more receptive to, let's develop this kinship. And we're in a sense talking about kinship between people, but it's also that kinship between people and earth, right, and the environment. So,
and it's often called a path, but it's also neural pathways. So the hyper kind of Western masculine left hemisphere dominant has made us more right-handed, for example, 14% or something. It's skewed even our physiology, but we can change it. We can consciously participate. And that's where I love with the Blackfoot pyramid structure, teepee, it has self-actualization, community, and then it has culture, which I also think is another way to say cultural evolution. We need to adapt and evolve pretty rapidly at this point, but we can do that if we're conscious, and especially cultural consciousness because it's collective.
Definitely. Could you hold that up just a moment?
It's also
probably
beautiful.
Just catching on that. Mm-hmm. So, in reading this article too, we see two pyramids. But in rereading, or as closely reading anyway, it really talks about this isn't necessarily what the format that Maslow came up with or the Blackfoot, because really what they're talking about is circular rather than triangles, wasn't it? So that's a whole different concept too, isn't it? This right here as opposed to the linear, whichever direction you're going.
Yeah.
And
I actually sometimes they talk about, circumambulating. So circle, but it can be circle with progression and regression. With quantum physics, you can go equal distance, backwards and forwards, causality. So, part of us is biocentrism incorporates the observer in quantum physics, which is also something we need to, it's been around for over 100 years. We got to get to this, integrating it. But if you take the circling and you add movement, you get that spiralic expansion, and that's pretty cool too.
And that direction that you're just doing, is upward. We're moving in another
upward
sense forward
and downward, because a lot of the Western, you could almost say the Western movement is an ascent, and then we also need a descent, and so that's where, and we need to be doing both, obviously, just like I think we really do need to go forward and backward with ancestors, those becoming ancestors to be born yet, and those who are ancestors in our past, that we have access in ways that we don't imagine. Because one of the things that's in this is that it's they call it multiple realities, but it's a different framework of space-time that I think is actually more akin to quantum physics and biocentrism and some of those things than our like linear, finite, one-way ticket, so that it creates potential and opportunity in ways that it's hard for this line to imagine.
And it just, again, seems our culture, this nation, we're moving on that path of, again, kind of instead of sustainability is usability. You know, how can I continue to use those resources in a way there's going to have to be some compensation here. So it's developing something where we're awareness, I think, and again, hopefully with kinship, again, not just between people, but also, Mother Earth, because we better find some other planets that
Let's just stop looking. I'm pro stop looking, and let's get to business here. But I do think using some of the tools in our toolbox, like 21 to 26 days, something like that creates a pattern.
Yep.
You know, so
habits, yep.
It's creating sustainable change where it's like all of us have things we can do, whether it's, you know, like going to the co-op more so we're not using packaging, or I loved some of the books that are out now because it can be like investing in a female-run business, or it can just look a million different ways. Yeah. But pick something new that is a helpful, sustainable, ecological kinship model, and do it for that 24 days approximately. And then once you've got that, then pick something new. But, you know, working consciously and deliberately with ourselves as, you know, little Pavlovian patternable creatures, you know, so that we can create sustainable change in the sense that we sustain it, we do it.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of Pavlov, how do we get the right side to kind of take over a little more of what's going on the left side? Okay,
so Jill Bolte Taylor's book is so great, and I don't know what it's called, but we'll put it up next to.
Okay.
So Jill Bolte Taylor, A Stroke of Insight was her first book. This next one is all about how do you do this? Like, how do you create, and she personifies as archetypes the two that are the left, masculine, Western model, again, as the ego and the shadow. To right are the soul, and then the self, which, okay, anyone who's experienced these, and she's great because she's like, oh my goodness, like I'm never going, it's like a hell realm over here. Like it'll get you done if you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, but it's essentially, literally your cortisol stress-inducing land of separate, you know, inferiority. It's like, okay, who doesn't want to have more time hanging out on the right side where you're connected and you're one with all nature and creation, and you're like, it's that transcendent state. So she goes about, how do you do this, you know, and she has all kinds of, so I'm recommending her book, all kinds of strategies of, this is what this looks like, this is what it feels like, how can you see it in your life? Well, when this pattern comes, like how can you, she calls it like a committee, but it could also be a council, like in an older tradition, calling a council of like, okay, let's talk about this. But essentially it's taking the reins out of the ego, who's controlled by the shadow, which is another way of saying fear and pain. And then how can we give this right side that is essentially our Zen side more time and some leadership function? So, or tune in for more, but that would be, it's parts theory, so it's parts work, but it's working with your brain, and I think that'll help people, that they're like, this is my brain, she's a neuroanatomist, and yet at the same time you can actually make change in your brain, in your life, by doing it consciously.
So like so many things, it starts right here, doesn't it?
Oh, boy, it all starts here, yeah.
And then hopefully, you know, we can share it out there, but really kind of tune in right here, you know, and develop. And that sounds like a fascinating book. And just what she's talking about. Wow.
Yeah, and her motivation is beautiful because she essentially realizes this is what we need. The kinship is over here. Like, we have to feel our connection to the world and each other. We have to, or we're pretty much doomed. And so what her motivation was she had this amazing experience. How can she facilitate it for others? So
And that's what's incredible too, is through experience, how we just realize more and more of what's going on, and what's going on right here. But there's sometimes what has to be the wake-up call. It's for us to finally get it.
yeah.
Something's got to happen.
Yeah, and then the beauty is, I think a lot of people are waking up now, and that's where, that critical mass, 100th monkey, whatever it is, it doesn't take what we think it takes. And the world needs you. Like, you are powerful. Enough of this, we are worms, or, we can't affect change. We absolutely can. So that be the change in the world you wish to see.
Definitely.
Mahatma Gandhi, go.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of...
We covered a lot, yeah.
For sure, and I appreciate everything that you've shared. And so where are we going next? So the next time we show up here?
I have no idea
No
where
idea?
we're going next. We're on a meander, a walkabout.
True.
Hopefully we'll come back with some, Chief Seattle's web of life, some new connection that we've made, and we can share about it.
Well, something you mentioned in your conversation is Vision Quest. And it sounds like that is something that we're going to get a chance to do. So I guess it's that medicine walk that is kind of the setup of taking a day and walking in nature and just asking, what's my vision?
Yeah.
And again, if it's right here to continue to develop ourselves individually, so we can also share collectively, but it's one avenue or one path seems to be through the Vision Quest to be able to do that.
Absolutely, and then also art and nature take us to this hemisphere. Like, there's a reason on the rite of passage, I don't know about you, but when I came back or was coming back from the 3 days out on the land in the fasting, I really did have that, like, one with the universe, the sunrise has broken me open, I am the daughter of the sunrise. And part of me is like, that makes no sense in terms of like how that would happen, but except that I have returned to this balance of the right hemisphere and right relationship in which I am in kinship with all. And that's a beautiful thing, and it really can be as simple as art and nature.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you. And,
thank you, Beck. Thank you, TCTV.
Yes, definitely, and tune in next time.
Yeah.
All right. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
So I know you've mentioned this before with paintings of it's not quite finished.
Yeah, it's not quite finished.
To the non
person.
It looked, yeah, really.
That's part of why I brought it. Is like, I know there are layers, but it's like, it's still a functional painting in terms of bringing it. Yeah.
There's a lot going on, that's for sure.
There's a lot going on, yeah.
And yet it sounds like there's still some things that you
want to add.
Yeah.
A lot of it is details, like layer work, so a lot of it is. Doesn't make that big a difference in terms of the composition or anything, but it's the details.
You know what's cool about your paintings too? So many times, I just noticed this because I don't know, I was just really drawn to the middle, the center, and the kind of the top, but the beehive idea and how you've worked bees into your other works, and it's just
because they're a socially altruistic organism. They're matriarchal, and they are a model of of kinship, of right relationship. They pollinate, they just are part of this whole interconnected web, and so they seem like they're role models.
How about, I was just going to say, how about, a new movement, be a bee.
Be a bee. Yeah, BB.
And, you know, it's so true how, and, you know, I guess ants kind of do something
Yeah,
similar
similar.
too. How they all work together, and